Welcome to the Practical Church Revitalization podcast with our co-hosts Don McKinnon and Eric Malloy, where we look at church revitalization in real time.
All right, so
mind the background noise. We're sitting at Panera.
Yeah.
Though they don't sponsor us, but maybe they should. You guys hear this? Give us a sponsorship.
So I'm Don McKinnon, pastor of First Baptist Church of Sutton, and I'm here with my podcast partner,
Eric Malloy, pastor of the First Church in Charlestown. The First Church in Charlestown. I don't know why I feel like saying that today. It's probably because it's Bunker Hill Week. It's Charlestown Pride Week, which isn't like normal Pride Week, which you'd expect. It's like Pride in Charlestown and the Battle of Bunker Hill. So let me throw that out there. That's important.
but yeah, you are the first church in Charlestown.
That's correct.
So 1632.
1632. It's funny because we were at that event the other day. The guy was talking about how old his church was. So Don and I were at this event the other day, and the guy was talking about his church was founded in 1776, and probably louder than I should have. I was like, "Oh, that's cute. 1776. That's adorable." We were like almost 150 years old at that point. I mean, really. So.
And it's young compared to my church too.
Right.
You know, so actually, I had turned to you for the first time. I'm like, oh, youngin. So, it's rare I get to say that around you, but
yeah, you know.
So, on today's podcast, we are here with Dr. Jim Harrell of Overseed.org, who has been our sponsor since episode 2. Jim had Overseed. Well, I'm going to let Jim explain that, but Overseed has been a great mentoring program for Eric and myself. I've had the experience of being with Overseed a little bit longer than what I've been actually like as a pastor for the last year, but I actually was introduced to them through Dr. John Lloyd, who was pastor at Christ Community Church in Taunton for a number of years, and he actually was the one who put the earworm in my ear to consider replanting over planting. And as challenging as replanting is, I can see it more so. I mean, we are reading Church Planting is for Wimps, and I can finally understand why that is, having been both in a plant and a replant.
And now let's remember, since we didn't give him a shout out on our books episode, Jim is also the author of Church Replanter, which I've read. Good book. I think I read it in 2 sittings. So, but that doesn't mean it's like a Dr. Seuss or anything like that. I read fast. So let's I don't want to insult the guy. So, but anyways, Jim's here with us.
So, Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is that Overseed is.
Well, thanks a lot. It's great to be here. My background is I grew up going to church before I was born. I grew up in a Missionary Alliance church. Then I got involved in the Navigators. I was on staff with the Navigators. Then God called me back to the church. I was involved in some church planting. Was approved by what was then the Baptist General Conference. I went through their church planting assessment torture test, and I was on the way to church planting, but I wanted to get some seminary background, so I came down to the North Shore of Massachusetts to go to finish at Gordon Conwell, and I ended up attending a replant church. I didn't know that because it had already replanted in the early 1970s. But as I got to know the pastor, and as God began to work in my life, God called me from planting to replanting. Happened actually at about 5:30 in the morning, one April, on the main street of Dorchester, Massachusetts. And God and I had a conversation in the middle of the street, and that's when God said, really, I want you to work on replanting. So spent a lot of time with that pastor, finished seminary, did my doctorate in replanting, and just began to realize that in most cases, replanting starts with the pastor. You know, most of the churches in New England, it's interesting in New England, in 2010, there was roughly 7,500 churches in New England. 50% of those were historic New England churches, many of which are declining. So as I began to think about how do we reach New England for Christ, I became convinced that one of the key strategies is that we need to reach people in communities through revitalizing existing churches. So we're a coaching organization. We coach pastors in revitalization context, but our vision really is to reach New England for Christ by revitalizing our existing churches.
Now, what do you find is the easiest part of replanting and the hardest part of replanting?
The easiest part is to find a job. The hardest part is when you actually show up. In all seriousness, New Englanders kind of have this reputation as kind of being crusty and hard to get to know. Typically, it's an older congregation. Typically, replanters are younger. But if they take the time to build the relationships, wonderful things begin to happen in terms of friendship. I think the hard part is figuring out where you are. If you don't understand the starting point, then the strategies are often uninformed. And probably the third thing is to not be in a hurry, to let God do what God's going to do in the time frame that matches the context. And so to kind of do the spade work, the groundwork, the weeding work, figuring out, okay, which foundations can be repaired, which foundations need to be replaced, and what's good here that we can celebrate and make better. Figuring those things out is often a challenge, particularly because most replanters are right out of school. It's usually their first pastorate, and so they don't tend to have a lot of experience. Good guys, well gifted, and that's what we think coaching really comes into play, is how do we help pastors think about where they're at and how do they move forward at a pace that fits the context.
Now, I can definitely attest to building that friendship with the older person, because our oldest gentleman at First Sutton, he and I have been bonding over the silliest of things. It's the TV show Vikings. He loves Vikings. He talks about it, and it happened to be a show I've been watching, and it's just funny because that's how we've connected and just been able to build off of that into actually mentoring and everything from that. And it seems weird, but this is coming from a guy whose father mentored him using comic books, and how does this principle of this comic book apply with this principle in the Bible?
So, yeah, that's the whole development of friendship with the older has been kind of our almost our saving grace at First Church, just because we have two guys who've really kind of held it together for the last 10 years, I'd say. And then just having them on my side and having them be supportive and sometimes just reluctantly supportive has been a blessing to us. I even tell the two of them, I always refer to them, they're like the guys up in the balcony of the Muppet Show. You know what I mean? Just
Waldorf and
Statler and Waldorf, kind of old curmudgeons who crack terrible jokes and are just kind of grumpy all the time. So.
And I've met one of them, so I can attest. He even looks like one of them.
But I mean, it has definitely taken care of us, and to have someone who, when you make a decision that isn't always popular with the older crowd, that you have someone who's like, well, this is the way it is, and and this is where we're going. So it is, because for them to say it carries a lot more weight than for me to say it with the generation that's been there for decades. So that's definitely a benefit. I have a question.
Yeah.
What are some qualities that you would look for, or that you would say a replanter needs to have or needs to develop?
Great question. It really varies, of course, depending on the context, but at least three things come to mind. Maybe I'll think of a fourth as I talk. One is you have to be committed to being a chaplain to the existing congregation, of taking the time, of being patient, of getting to know them, of loving them, and caring for them in these last 10 to 15 years of life. But on the second side is you have to be a catalyst for something new. If it stays the way it is, you'll be the beloved pastor who buries everybody and shuts the door. So you've got to have some intentionality in you to where you can go out in the community and be a catalyst for what is going to be the rebound of the church. I think the third thing is there has to be an emotional foundation where you can take a punch. Because if you do the chaplaincy well, you're going to build trust. If you do the catalyst well, you're going to use it up. And you're going to take some hits. People are not going to like change. Anybody who says they want change, according to House, is lying, and he's probably right. And so you're going to ruffle some feathers, and if you can't take that, if you can't be disliked, it's going to be very hard to be a replanter. So there has to be an emotional stability. I think the third one is most churches have declined because there's unhealth in the system. Certain unhealthy relational patterns have become the norm. And therefore, the healthy people, they come in, they visit, they look at that and go, I'm out of here. Where the unhealthy people come in, they go, oh, this is normal, and they join. So there's certain patterns that have become normalized. That means you're going to have some difficult conversations and bring things to light and, realize that that's going to cause tension. Certain people aren't going to like that, and just be willing to go through that process of bringing health back into the system and letting that become normal. And that takes time, and while that's happening, you can be the person non grata. So you're going to have to get up and preach every Sunday knowing there's a certain set of people that don't like you, and to be okay with that, and to not stress at night, and not to bring that home and build unhealthy patterns in your own home system. So there has to be just a certain level of, I've been called, and we're going to go through the process, whether it's fast or slow, easy or hard.
Yeah, we just celebrated a year at First Sutton, and as much as I wanted, I've seemed to have developed a reputation sort of as a Debbie Downer the last few months because, fallen condition and all of this. It was just the Lord placed on my heart that in order for us to move forward, the core group, the older group that was there, had to forgive the leadership of the past and understand that they cannot keep bringing up the past if they're going to move forward and they want to see it grow. And it was a difficult sermon to preach, and yes, I knew I wasn't going to be liked for it, but I preached it. So,
but I think it's funny that you say that, because I watched that the 30 for 30 of the two Bills, Bill Belichick and Bill Parcells.
Oh yeah.
For those of you, if you listen outside of New England, Bill Belichick's a very revered figure here, in case you're curious. But one of the things they talked about when he was coaching the Giants is all the defensive players called him Doom, because all he ever did was bring up what you could have done better, and planning for everything that could go wrong. And I was watching it with someone else, and they kind of turned their head sideways, and I thought, what a genius name to have somebody, to always think up worst case scenario and think about 100 different ways, which then of course was a big insight into my personality. As I'm sitting there thinking, I'm typing notes on my phone about why it's a great idea to always be negative, to think of the negative and how to overcome it. I was like, wow, that's probably a pretty telling part of my personality. So I don't know. I just thought it was kind of funny is that you always plan for the. I'm like, oh, you mean normal people don't plan for the negative all the time? Oh,
I'm kind of thinking because he has the hood. I'm thinking of him as Dr. Doom now. So,
I mean, but I don't know. I just think there's a benefit to seeing the negative and kind of expecting it, especially in a replant. I think that's that's a good kind of a good way to look at things.
Well, I think when replanters are planning their year, they have to look at it through both of these lenses. What am I going to do to minister to this older congregation that's here? What am I going to preach to? What are the needs? What are the growth issues there? And then also, what am I going to do to be a catalyst for something new? How am I going to engage the community? How much hours am I going to spend in the community? What am I going to preach to that's going to attract the community, even if they're not there yet? And so you got kind of these bifocal lens by which you have to think about in terms of a replant.
So, what would you say? What are some ways for the listeners out there that are considering going into a replant? Maybe they haven't even thought of planting a church, but you're talking about reaching the community. What are some of the ways that they could consider reaching the community, especially if there's, say, they're in a small community where there might be only one or two community-driven events? What are some ways that they could?
Well, sure. So I think partly, again, back to the starting point. I use three terms, and everybody uses these terms different, but the way I use them is, restart is, we're going to take over this church, but we're actually going to shut it down for 6 months. We're going to rebrand it, and we're just going to restart it. To me, replanting is, it's close to closing, but we think we can work from the inside out. And revitalization is the same thing, but not as bad a starting point. So that's how I use them. But I think in terms of reaching the community, what we're talking about is incarnational living. So yes, I need to engage in the events that are already there. So if I'm in a historic church that already has ties to the community, I want to find out what are those ties. In other words, what are the natural relational bridges that already exist because this church has been a part of this community for hundreds of years. Now, that could be a good bridge or a bad bridge, depending on what the past is. So I want to walk down those bridges of relationship. But in many ways, it's like a church plant. I've got to go be in the community. I've got to go be incarnational. Certainly in New England, with all of the opiate issues and all of that, Celebrate Recovery is almost a given ministry in New England. There's just a huge need, whether it's AA, Celebrate Recovery, some way to address this issue of just despair that so much is rampant in New England. It's in the whole country, but it's very much in New England. And so what New Englanders do is they either drink or drug themselves because there's not a lot of hope at the core of a lot of people. But a lot of it is you just have to go live in the community. I mean, some guys will recommend that a replanter should spend 50% of their time just in the community. Dale Edwards, who's a denominational exec who did a revitalization replant up in near Hanover, New Hampshire, back in the day when there was Woolworths, which doesn't exist anymore, but Woolworths had a counter where they would sell soda, and it was the only thing really in town. So he would do half of his study time at the counter in Woolworths and would intentionally stop and talk with people coming in, people shopping. He just became familiar with the people in his town because it was not a transient place. A lot of people come in or out. He just needed to get to know who was there. So I think a lot of it is, where am I and what is going to put me into the flow of people that I can plant myself and just begin to build relationships.
That's a good point.
So, if you were to dream, where would you love to see Overseed go? Of course, we all have, okay, well, reality sets in, and that's not. But I mean, we do serve a big God who can do anything. And we always pitch in our church to dream a God-sized dream. because that way it relies us to force us to rely on Him. So, what is your God-sized dream for Oversee?
So sure. So like I say, we're a coaching organization. So we're building a network of coaches throughout New England. So our fundamental ministry is what we call a replanter cohort. It's a monthly gathering of replanters for 2 to 3 hours.
Which we just finished, by the way.
Yeah, which we were just doing. And so it's a time to, for prayer and share, to get to know one another, to care for one another, something intentional around replanting. Like I say, we're going through the book right now, Church Plantings for Wimps. Try to talk about how do we keep getting better as preachers. And we do that about 8 to 9 months out of the year. And so the goal would just to see those proliferate. But, that requires, recruiting a coach. Some of our coaches have replanting backgrounds, some of them don't. So we have to kind of fill in that space. But, I'd love to see basically a replanter cohort really in every city in New England, because, we're just at a point where the need is that great. Mm-hmm. What we find is a lot of guys, they graduate from seminary or they get a call and they look around at ministry opportunities, and oftentimes replanting or revitalization is the jobs that are open, so they take a job. And the people seem nice, they seem to talk about the gospel, seem open to change. They get there and then they realize they're in Mars. That it's not exactly what they thought for various and sundry reasons. And so, I just think revitalization takes time. And in many places, depending on the starting point, it can be a 7 to 10 year project. And if guys only make it 4 years every time, we're never dealing with the dysfunction. We're never really getting where we need to go. So, to me, replanters need encouragement and coaching to make good decisions, to stay in the game and watch God work. So that would be our goal, is that we have a great network of coaches, that replanters are being coached, God reaches New England for Christ, and then we all retire.
So, how does it make you feel seeing that denominations and networks are realizing that this is a need? Like, there's been a lot of focus on church planting over the last 10 to 20 years, and now over the last 5 to 10 years, denominations and networks are starting to say, wait, we're forgetting the established church and these churches that are losing people to the church plants. Like the North American Missions Board, there's Mark Clifton, who just last year was named Director of Revitalization and Replanting, and he's really kind of pushing the I won't say the boundaries, but he's
Making
pushing
an emphasis.
Yeah, and he's not just focusing on the SBC, but other denominations. He's talking and bringing them into the conversation.
Oh, it's a great question. So when God called me to start Overseed, which was around 2007, we didn't start till 2008, but I was looking for language, like how do we talk about this? Because I came out of the church planting world, and so I Googled revitalization and replanting, and all I got was building companies and seed companies. There was just kind of this lull. There wasn't even a language, so we thought, well, maybe we just need to take this on. But you fast forward 10 years and you Google those same words, it's all Christian organizations. It's really exciting. So rather than, 10 years ago we were spearheading this in New England, now we just want to partner with folks. I find it just really exciting that God is bringing this issue to the front. I mean, it's nothing new. We've been doing revitalization since Revelation 2 and 3. So Oversee didn't invent this. Nobody invented this. We're just trying to come alongside what God has done and is doing, and I just find it exciting that God has brought more partners to the table, and ways where we can take what we've learned and then partner with folks who have larger organizations. I just find it great.
So, just last question. Let's think about it. Give the viewers a thing. If someone hears this and says, "Man, this is a really exciting idea. This is a good concept." How would someone go go from replanting or a seminary student or wherever they're at, how do they get connected and how would they get involved in Overseed?
Sure. I mean, the easiest way is just to go to our website, overseed.org, or they can certainly email me, jim@overseed.org, and we'd love to set up a Skype or have a phone call. You know, I'm often up at Gordon Conwell, at least once a month because they have a lunch and learn around revitalization that I sit in on. So we just do a lot of just conversations around what is this? Does this seem like a good fit? We kind of do informal assessments, helping guys, go through the hiring process because it's often different than what they expect, typically, especially if it's a mainline church. Mm-hmm. So we've got a lot of background in that, but mostly just, again, coming alongside guys or gals and just helping them think about, all right, how do you want this to play out?
All right. So you heard that, and cohort, Coach Yamato, and Don and I my wife and I were laughing about this. It's a week before Father's Day, so this probably won't post for a while, just to kind of give some.
Yeah, this isn't going to post till July, so
just to give some concept on this, and we have a busy weekend next weekend, and so my wife wanted to celebrate Father's Day today, and we were just thinking about what it was, and she even mentioned how that I look forward to this every month, the chance to sit around with these guys, and how it just kind of built into our day, regardless of how we're celebrating. So I do want to encourage anybody who is looking at replanting or who is a replanter or a revitalizer. Well, that's odd.
that's next door.
That we would love for you to, I would highly recommend for you to connect, because it is a lonely, especially most of the time you're the only staff member and all that kind of stuff. And so I would strongly encourage you to connect with Overseed and find a way to connect with other guys in your area going through a similar situation.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, these guys last night I had a difficult call with somebody at the church, and it was just having encouragement today. There's always that part of you that doesn't want to go because of everything, but just being part of a cohort helps you and encourages you. And so, yeah, if you are in the New England area and you are needing to connect with somebody, I really strongly suggest contacting Jim and Overseed, and just get yourself connected to one of the local cohorts that's going on in your area.
Well, thanks for having me. This has been great.
Yes, we thank you for giving us this time to interview you, and hopefully we will interview you again within a few, will be more than a few months on the podcast, since we seem to, we've learned the bucket and drop technique.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thanks for listening. Hope you found anything interesting. Feel free to message us on Facebook or post a comment. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to either one of us. And then, of course, check out Jim and Overseed at overseed.org.
All right. And with that, we are done with this podcast, and come back when we have some new content to help you in your revitalization, as we do revitalization in real time.
It's funny, if you go...
The Practical Church Revitalization podcast is sponsored by Overseed. Overseed's vision is to see growing historic churches in every New England town reaching their communities for Christ. If you want to be part of a mentorship program and you live in the New England area, please go to overseed.org and find out how you can get in contact with one of the hub churches in the area or one of the many pastoral network cohorts that are run in the area. Once again, go to overseed.org for more information on the Overseed Network.